Right, everybody. All right, everybody. All right, everybody. All you people out there in the world, and I'm talking world because I have interviewed some people around the world. If you have not noticed, for whatever reason, I've interviewed some people in a gentleman in South Africa, a lady in Australia, a lady in Ireland. And you know, reason why I say that international thing, that just sounds impressive, doesn't it? Whoa, you been that way? Yeah, that's what I'm doing. And people are watching me around the world. I'm Anthony Brogdon. I'm a guy that has come up with a brilliant idea, so I suspect, I think, I feel, of this Strong Inspirations YouTube channel where we let the people do the talking. Let me tell you something. I got a guy on the channel tonight. I am extremely excited that he's on, and I'm going to let him do the talking. I'm going to just come up with a few questions. Watch, you're going to like this interview. You're going to really like this interview. Let me go through this for a second. There are good things happening here at Strong Inspirations. First of all, I'm having my own festival in Quindaro, Kansas, May 27th through the 29th. You all need to be there, but I can only accept 1,000 people. That's what the park can hold. And if 1,000 of you from out of town come, then there's probably going to be about 300-400 of them beautiful Quindaro people out of Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, going to come through. They're going to hear about it. And because I want to use the local bands, the DJs, the caterers, the vendors, all that, so we can feel that vibe, what comes out of that Kansas area. And if you are interested in wondering why I chose that spot, there's a video on the channel of a guy I interviewed from that town called Quindaro. I'm not going to tell you no more. Just look for the video and watch it. It's mind-blowing. Let's see, what else I'm going to tell you. Things are moving along here. I got another festival or another event that I'm showing up at in Elaine, Arkansas. Hold on, watch this one now, my friends. There's a video on the channel about Elaine, Arkansas. What's so interesting about it is that they really have kept it quiet, but 200 to 300 African Americans, innocent people, were killed over 4 days, all because they just was tired of being taken advantage of. That's all it was. Nobody did anything wrong. We were just trying to say we tired of it. We're going to organize. And the people said, no, we don't want you to. And they shot in a church. And I just interviewed a guy the other day. Watch this. I'm going to release his video soon. His great-grandfather was one of them that shot in the church. Boom, shakalaka. He shot him wrong, man. And my man said, I cannot forgive my grandfather for doing that. I said, man, you telling this story? He even wrote a book about it. He wrote a book about what his grandfather had done. Oh, you got to watch that video. I'm interviewing some, oh man, I don't know. I'm finding some people that's telling some stories. How about this? Did you see the video on the channel of the guy whose grandfather was almost lynched? They had him at the tree and a guy saved his life. They had him at the tree. Now, they had beat him up, stripped him naked, and was walking him down the street. Looked for the tree and found the branch, said, here it is right here. We'll do it here. And a guy in that crowd, up under the hood, saved his life. Watch that video. How about this? I got a video on the channel of 2 great-granddaughters whose grandfather was enslaved. My man was so tight, when he got his freedom, he opened up a car manufacturing company. A car manufacturing company. This is 1905. He coming up with his own automobile. They horse and buggy, and then when it became motorized, he did that too. And was a pillar of his community. I'm telling you, on Strong Inspirations, we're giving it to you straight, no chaser. So do me a favor, my friends, hit the subscribe button. It's free. Just hit the button. It don't do nothing but say, I like what you're doing. And I know you out there because my numbers is up. Hit the hit the like button on this video because you're gonna like what this gentleman got to say. Watch me. And then watch him. Watch me ask a couple questions and watch him answer them succinctly. How about that? I got some words for you now. I can succinctly to you. How about this? Hit the notifications bell because I'm posting. Last week, I did a video every day. This week, I'll post 4 or 5 videos. I did one 2 days ago. And that was with the one with the guy out of South Africa. Yesterday, I did one with a guy out of Florida. And today I did one with a guy who likes soap operas, the history of blacks in soap operas. Interesting video, though. People are sharing these stories with us. So like all them and hit the buttons and everything. And then, my friends, tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. I got a goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Very doable. I just need 50 to tell 100 people and ask them to hit the button. It don't cost no information. That's very doable. Let's grow this thing. A couple more things before I have my guest come on. He's sitting there patiently, a good-looking guy. He said, hey, man, I got things to do, you know, what have you. Watch my movie, everybody. I'm that serious. I took 2 years out of my life to develop this film. It's a documentary on the rise of Black business in America. And then after that, I was so excited I got it done. I took it to 40 cities on my own dime, without a distributor, showing it wherever I could, like Johnny Appleseed, spewing this information towards the folks who came and seen it. Some of my shows, I had packed house, and some of them nobody showed. I had a show in Little Rock, Arkansas, nobody showed. That was a last minute little, you know, come together because I was leaving there and going to Tulsa, Oklahoma. No, that was Dallas. I'm sorry, it was Dallas. But it was nobody showed in Little Rock because I was there really for other reasons. And the guy who owned the theater gave me $100. He said, man, I like it that much. So watch this. It's streaming on Amazon. It's called Business in the Black. And then, my friends, I tell you how good I am. I wrote a book on it. You know what I'm telling you? I really think, and I had this, maybe a little birdie told me, I'm gonna sell 1,000 copies, 1,000,000 copies of this. Not 1,000, 1,000,000. I've already sold 1,000. I'm gonna sell 1,000,000 copies. As this word spreads, something that's as easy to read as this book, which comes with a money-back guarantee that if you read my book and you don't learn nothing new, I give your money back. What you got to lose? Watch this. Read this book, my friends. I'm telling you. I got all the way slaves gained their freedom. I talk about the Civil War. This is what he's going to talk about. I talk about the rise of Black business in America. I give you names and dates, places, in an easy to read thing. I number the facts so that all you got to do is go to a fact when you want to remember it. You want to tell somebody, say, go to fact number 57, 67, 87, 97, 107, 203. Oh, you got to stop somewhere. And I do in the book. It's very good. Every 10th book I sell, I donate one to a school. I've donated up to 85 books. I'd rather they have it, man. I got a box of them in my basement that they are going away. Every day I'm sending out a book. I want to send out a lot of them. All right, get a copy of my book. Now, lastly, you hear me use this term strong a lot, right? That's just my word. I've been saying strong for a long time now, and I like it. Strong says everything. And what it really does say in my world is strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. That's strong, which is my introduction for my guest today. He's a strong man. Come on, man, and tell us your name. Let's get it on, Strong Inspiration. Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me. My name's Dylan Carroll.
And you're where?
I am currently in Sacramento, California.
I've been there. I showed my movie in Sacramento. Nice town.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Chico, California, which is
I got a story about Chico. Well, yeah, I know Chico.
Hopefully
too.
It's a good one. Yeah, it's a small college town in the Sacramento Valley.
Yeah.
California State University, Chico's there.
So now, how did you decide to pick this as your career path?
Yeah, good question.
We're going to talk about you for a second here. We got to everybody know who you are.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'd always been a history lover. My mom is a big history lover and has a big kind of love of learning. So we were always thinking about history. I wasn't quite sure of my career path growing up and even in college. I got into college to play volleyball, and I was really pretty listless for a career. And one day I was watching the History Channel, and it just sort of dawned on me, like, wait, well, I love history. Why don't I major in history? And so I decided to do that. And I was kind of, sampling some different topics in history. I was thinking about kind of focusing on European history, and that was sort of where I was kind of going. And there was a class at California State University, Chico, where I got my bachelor's degree. There was an American Civil War and Reconstruction class. I always had my eye on taking it, but it was at an inconvenient time. It was from 4 to 5:30 or something like that. And I worked in college. I waited tables throughout college. And so that was, 2 shifts I would lose out each week, right? So I never took it because of the inconvenient time. But my last year, I was a senior in college, and I thought, you know what? I really want to take this class. To hell with it. I'll eat 2 weeks of work and just take this class.
Okay.
And it was literally a life-changing class. It just blew me out of my seat, and I fell in love with the American Civil War.
So when we talk about history and studying history, is your test just kind of like multiple choice? Did Franklin or did John, did Harry, who did what? I mean, how was there every day a test on history? How does that develop your mindset? Let me ask you that.
So how do I do it?
Yeah, how do you do it? How did people do it in school? Yeah.
Yeah, in my experience, it's a lot of writing and multiple choice. History is a writing discipline, so you need to kind of be able to write and to make arguments. When we're dealing with history, we have incomplete facts, right? The documentary evidence that's available to us, it doesn't always survive. People throw stuff away, they burn stuff, they lose it. So we have little fragments here and there of the documentation. And so we use argument to kind of fill in the blanks and to make a story out of the documents that we have and the context of the time and what we know.
Okay.
And so you use writing and arguments to make those arguments, to fill in the blanks that where there's missing documents, and to make an argument.
Okay. Let me stop you right there. With that, then, if I make an argument, what makes mine an A and not a C argument? Because of what you taught me that says, okay, you got an A because you heard me and you understand this. You get a C because you're missing something. Is that kind of how it goes?
Yeah, sometimes it'll be interpretation or analysis. I really want my students to, not just know the facts, not to know who it was or what date it was, but
Right.
to learn to think analytically and learn to
Okay.
analyze, because these are hard skills that students are going to learn use in their everyday lives and in their careers.
Okay.
Analysis. So oftentimes, I'll in my students' papers, I really want them to think analytically. And so, I might dock students points if they're not analyzing enough, if they're
Okay.
just sort of telling me a story, or they cite evidence from a document, but they don't analyze it. They don't tell me why it's important.
Okay.
I'll sort of say, you're not analyzing this enough. You're not telling me the
Okay.
significance here. It's not enough just to cite something. You have
Yes.
to analyze it
Oh, I got you.
and tell me the significance, and then students are going to use that in their lives. All jobs, basically nearly every job, wants their employees to think analytically, to think outside the box.
Okay. Let me ask you, was there a aha moment for you in some history that you analyzed that maybe that first of all, somebody said to you was not correct, maybe in some regards, that you could refute what they might have said? Is there something that has happened to you in that regard?
Maybe not so much like refuting anyone. I can't recall a specific instance in that. I mean, a big aha moment for me in my career, my upcoming book coming out in December is called Invisible Wounds. It's about mental illness and Civil War soldiers.
Okay.
And I just read this book called Shook Over Hell by Eric Dean, which argued that, was the first to argue that Civil War soldiers might have been afflicted with PTSD, with post-traumatic stress disorder.
On both sides of the fence, both soldiers, the Confederate and Union.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dean argued that Civil War soldiers, North and South, may have been afflicted with PTSD. I just read this book, and I was going through a soldier's letters. This soldier from Alabama, a Confederate soldier, and as I was reading one of his letters, he writes to his wife and says, he just survived the Battle of Shiloh in Southwest Tennessee. And he's writing to his wife and he tells her, I'm having, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he essentially says, I'm having great and exciting, dreams. I'm dreaming of battles, and many of them are tragedies, and they're frightening me more than the actual Battle of Shiloh did. And that was a moment where I was like, whoa, here it is, a soldier sort of having an invasive nightmare of a battle that's kind of recurring over and over. And that's sort of the signature symptom of PTSD, right? It's these invasive nightmares or hallucinations or flashbacks of a traumatic event. And that was a moment where like a light bulb kind of went off, and I was sort of like, okay, I'm seeing something here.
So part of what you have to do though is you have to like go out of body to think what they could have thought back 200 years ago.
Right.
So out of body, that's maybe a term for it, wouldn't you say, for what you personally have to do, and historians?
Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, it is. I mean, out of body is a good way to put it, but it is tricky because, this was a time, the 1860s, where something like PTSD didn't exist. That concept would have been foreign to them. Doctors weren't on the lookout for its symptoms. This is a pre-Freudian environment where they don't have concepts of traumatic memory,
sure,
like 20th century, Americans and people do. And so you have to be careful. You don't want to project too much. I think it would be easy to find any mention of anxiety or depression among a Civil War soldier or veteran, and then immediately say, oh, PTSD. But that might be irresponsible, right? Because someone with anxiety or depression, it might not necessarily be PTSD. It could simply be something else.
Okay.
So you have to really be careful and be meticulous and sort through the evidence and try and be as careful and meticulous as possible.
Let me ask you this: Have you, as you studied? And I'm gonna stay on the Confederate side on this one. How about that? Have you studied somebody, a Confederate soldier, and how they grew up, from where they grew up, what they did, what their attitude was, and then what was their call to say, I'm going to join these forces because I got to fight for this institution, and I understand that I might not come home. Or I've heard all those stories of the people who've been hurt in the fight. Have you run across something that takes you back so that you can understand what their mindset was like?
Yeah. There's tons of letters and documents from soldiers north and south, attesting about why they fought and what influenced them to join. A lot of them, as the historian Steve Berry said, they're young men, and they enlisted because they were young men. They fought because they were young. And
like how young? What are you talking about now? What year?
17, 18, 19.
Okay.
These were boys. And,
okay.
Boys often rush into conflict and wars.
Okay.
Many of them fought because when South Carolina fired on Fort Sumter, that was sort of the spark that lit the Civil War.
Sure.
And Abraham Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion in South Carolina. And many white Southerners, said, well, this Northern Army is going to be invading the South. And they said, we have to defend our homes. They argued that we had to defend our hearths and our hearthstones. So for many of them, it was a defense of home. Even ones who were kind of lukewarm about, say, for instance, slavery. Walter Lenore, who was a North Carolinian, he was kind of ambivalent about slavery. But when Lincoln makes the call, he wrote to his brother saying, quote, I remember that large drops of sweat stood on my forehead. I reflected that under God, I owed my life, my ease, my enjoyment, my property to the laws and institutions of my country. And so he sort of said, pitch this as a defense of the South. And then many of them openly defended slavery. Many of the states, when they justified, many of the Southern states, when they justified secession, they published, proclamations sort of justifying why they were seceding from the Union. And many of them were explicit about slavery, saying they felt that Abraham Lincoln's election and actions imperiled slavery, even though Lincoln was pretty clear that he had no intention of touching slavery.
Yeah, that's a lot of people don't see that connection. That's true.
Yeah, so Lincoln's openly clear. He's like, I have no intention to touch slavery, nor do I think I can. So Lincoln's clear about that, but Southerners are kind of paranoid in 1860. They're living in a different world than Northerners. They're reading Southern newspapers. They're only talking to Southerners. They're kind of in their own political bubble, and they'd kind of become addled by paranoia. They were paranoid that Lincoln was going to destroy slavery, and so many of them said, we're seceding to defend the institution of slavery, what many of them called, the cause of all their ease and enjoyment. And many, Southern men, some of them openly said they were doing so as well. How
could they feel that strong? Well, how did they feel knowing? Okay, so let me ask you, how about this? Is there a letter that says how they got into the service? You got to come down to Fort someplace any day this week, show up, don't bring no clothes, we're going to give you clothes, tell everybody, kiss them goodbye, and you only have to do it for 2 weeks. What is that induction ceremony like? Do you know that one?
Yeah, so during the Civil War, local communities raised local units. So, today when someone enlists, they'll be sent into units with people from all over the country and
Right,
sometimes all over the world
right,
who are brought into one unit.
right.
That's not the case in the Civil War. In the Civil War, communities raised units. So, say Selma, Alabama would raise a local unit. I'm making up a number, but
Yeah,
the
yeah, sure.
28th Alabama might be from Selma. And like a local elite from the community, someone who was rich and well known, would often kind of um, advertise the unit. Hey, we're raising a unit here in Selma, or this happened in the North too. We're
Yes,
raising a unit here in, New York.
yes.
Come join, and the local community would come join, and that whole community would join as a unit, and they'd be commissioned, as say I'm making up numbers again, 29th New York or
Yes.
27th Alabama, based on their states. And then the War Department would give them orders for where they would go, what army they would be attached to, what that would look like. So whole communities joined together. Brothers joined together, neighbors joined together, communities joined together. And then they would often be sent to a staging area, a place to meet, and they would usually be transported by railroad to their training ground where they would begin to train, and they would have a very brief training, sometimes just a couple weeks, where they'd get used to firing rifles and marching and doing formations and learning rudimentary battle tactics, and that was really it.
Okay.
In the early, the war breaks out in the spring of 1861. The first major battle is in the summer of 1861.
Okay, let me stop you right there. This is my, I don't mean no this. So Fort
That's fine.
Sumner happening when, and then when did that battle kick out, which gave both sides time to get their troops together? How long was that?
So Fort Sumter's in April of 1861. That really kicks off the war. That's the spark that lights the tinder. And both sides begin. The South's way ahead of the North. The South, takes a whole bunch of military garrisons and forts from the North. They take a lot of their arms and weapons from northern forts. And then they begin raising local militias, local units.
Right.
And the first battle is in July of 1861 at Bull Run.
Okay, so you saying April, May, June, July, let's say 3 months.
Yeah.
Now we're going into combat. Now we're full-fledged,
Right.
Going at each other.
Yep.
What is the mindset? Are there soldiers who run away? Are there a number of people who don't? First of all, let me ask this question: are there a number of people who do not join? If this local community, and let's say we choose one that got 20,000, not even 20,000, 6,000 residents, and out of the 6,000 men that all could be in the war, they're 18, 19, 16, whatever. How much percentage would you estimate actually did join? And how many of them said, I'm not going?
That's a good question. I don't have the percentages off the top of my head about the numbers of people who joined the armies versus the numbers who didn't. I don't know the number off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Someone knows, it's there.
Yeah. Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah. Someone
Yeah,
has,
okay.
I don't recall who, but that number's been compiled, so it's around.
Oh.
But it's in the North especially, it's a minority. Only a minority of military age men join the army.
Oh, really?
And Southerners who are either maybe prisoners of war or who for some reason visit northern cities, they're astonished, and they sort of say the North is fighting this war with one arm tied behind its back. There's a ton of military eligible men who are not fighting. The South, I think that based on percentages, the number of military age men who join is much higher. I know that something like 20 to 25% of white Southern men of military age, 18 to 35, die in the Civil War. So it's a pretty, it's pretty intense death rate. So the numbers statistically are higher in the South, although the South on raw numbers fields a smaller army than the North. There's about 900,000, give or take, an estimate of Confederate soldiers. There's about, at any given time, 2 million Union soldiers.
Oh, so it's just a lot more people in the North anyway. Yeah.
That's right.
Right. It's just a lot more people.
What is
the
was 14 million and the South was 9 million, I think.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, that's a big difference. What is the take of the, if you know any of this, of the families who, when their sons are going off, what's mom saying and what's dad saying? Go, go, go. I know it's all different and it's no one thing, but what might be that dynamic?
Yeah, you know, it really varies.
Yeah.
Some parents sort of celebrate, you know, and they celebrate their sons. They're happy for their sons to get this experience. There was a different, you know, in the 19th century, in the 1860s, there was a stronger kind of civic identity related to warfare. Americans at the time sort of believed that citizenship entailed that you had to defend the republic. You know, This was part of being a citizen. The responsibilities of being a man meant that you had to defend the republic, and sometimes that meant you had to sacrifice yourself for the republic. And so Americans like to say this. They like to say at the time, you know, I'm willing to sacrifice myself for the altar of freedom. I'm willing to sacrifice myself for my country. And their parents would say that too. You know, they'd say, we're willing to sacrifice our sons for freedom, for the country, for whatever.
I got you. Is there celebrations when they first go off? Are there towns that say, okay, this is the day we got our soldiers, and July 3rd or July or you know what I mean? May 29th was a day, and that day is acknowledged as under a title?
I don't know if there's a title for many of these days, but there certainly are big celebrations. You know, again, these units are community units, right, so the whole community would go out to see all their men leave for the war. Oftentimes, they would sew flags for them, kind of unit flags sewed by the community. They'd hand them over as a gift, and there'd be all, you know, bunting and bands and all this celebration for them as they, you know, hopped aboard the railroad and headed to their training station.
Right. What happens when now, and you maybe alluded to it earlier, now that they have seen battle, they've seen their comrade, brother, or whoever, either hurt or killed. What's the mindset of the soldier then? Is it more fight, or is now a lot of them are I don't know if this is the word, mutiny?
Yeah, it's definitely different.
Yeah, sure.
You know, most of them, when they enlisted, they believed the war would be short.
I heard that. Yeah.
Maybe not even a year. Some of them naively believed it would be bloodless. There maybe wouldn't even be a battle, or if there would be a battle, there'd be one battle. Most of them had, you know, never experienced combat. They'd only read about combat or seen pictures about combat, which were very romantic, right? You know, some guy rallying the forces, you know, waving his sword or his hat and saving the day. And they imagined that would be them. But then the experience of combat is much different. It's chaotic. At the time, you know, now in combat, there's smokeless powder. So when you fire a weapon, there's no smoke. That doesn't exist in the 1860s. So the powder that's fired, smoke billows up, and soon the whole battlefield is just wreathed in smoke and you can't see anything.
Yeah.
And it's chaotic. You know, combat is disordered. The courageous and the cowardly were killed alike. And many Americans at the time believed that courage would save the courageous. They get a hard lesson that that's not true.
Yeah.
That combat doesn't discern between the courageous and the cowardly, and often it kills the courageous more so than the cowardly.
Yeah.
And you know, this is nothing like they expected. Soldiers called it seeing the elephant. You know, you saw this elephant and it sort of changed things. And many soldiers had a rude wake-up call after their first taste with combat.
I'm sure.
Many soldiers described it as unfair. You know, some soldiers just hoped, you know, they wrote and said that they wished kind of the earth would open up and drop them down away from this combat. And,
oh, really? Yeah. Sure.
And they struggled with the violence. The round that was fired from muskets was a 50 caliber soft lead round. It was a, you know, a little personal cannon. And the artillery that was fired, you know, it shredded arms and legs. And
yeah, right.
Destroyed heads. And, you know, so they were witness to this awful violence of, you know, skulls being shattered and arms and legs being severed. And the real ugly face of war, which was, you know, men bleeding, you know, men crying out, men begging for life. And it was brutal. You know,
now really, much of the battle was not hand to hand, though, for the most part.
Yeah, most of the popular representations of Civil War battles show them fixing bayonets and then charging in and having hand-to-hand combat. That was incredibly rare.
Yes, right.
It almost never happened. And that's because the technology they had new technology, these Enfield rifled muskets with a mini A-ball. And the rifled muskets had rifling, cylindrical grooves cut into the rifle. And so when you fired the round, the bullet spun. And that gave you more accuracy and more range. And so a good marksman, you know, with a steady heartbeat and slow breath could shoot accurately at 500 to 800 yards.
Okay.
And so there was never really a chance to get hand to hand.
Yeah, right, right.
You could shoot down most people who were charging at you.
Yeah. Well, now, as we, you know, kind of winding down, so to speak, as the war is ending, people, first of all, people who've lost, who got hurt, when they go back home, what might be their disposition? Hey, man, this wasn't worth it. Is it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, the dispositions were, I think, varied. Many, you know, expressed no regrets. They said, you know, this is common that soldiers who wrote, veterans who wrote after the war, especially those who were injured, they often said, you know, I don't regret the sacrifices I've made for my country. I don't regret what I gave up and what I had to do. But there's little undercurrents of regret that you have to kind of look for and pay attention to. And I think that was, you know, those statements were kind of just culturally common for the day. It was expected that people would say that, and so they said it. But you can find little blips of regret here and there, you know,
sure. Especially if your leg has been blown off.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and in the South, you know, Confederate veterans, especially those who had been really grievously wounded, they're on their own. There really is no welfare state to help them, and life is hard, you know, and many of them were kind of like, some of them, you know, openly complained, what did I do this for?
Oh, really?
In the North, you know, historians like Brian Matthew Jordan have shown that there's this debate about what the war achieved pretty immediately. Union veterans are really upset at the leniency shown towards Confederates, and especially Confederate leaders. Union soldiers, they wanted trials. They wanted executions for the
Oh,
Confederate leaders
really?
like Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee and all these others. They didn't want, they were happy for the common Confederate soldier to be left alone because they understood them somewhat. But for the leaders, Union veterans wanted punishment, and they were furious that punishment was not forthcoming.
Was there any punishment or any, what was the fate of those people?
The commandant, Henry Wers, who was the commandant of Andersonville prisoner of war camp, the infamous and hated POW camp in Georgia, he was the only official Confederate leader executed.
Okay, now hold on. As we kind of close, I never heard that story. Give us the brief, what happened there? What is that story? The camp and whatnot.
Andersonville was a prisoner of war camp in Georgia for Union POWs. And in 1863, before 1863, there'd been a kind of exchange between the two sides. So prisoners of war would be exchanged for each other. So a Confederate prisoner of war would be sent back home in exchange for a Union prisoner of war who would come back north.
Okay.
That was the function for the first 2 years of the war. In 1863, African-American soldiers are enlisted by Congress and by Lincoln to serve as soldiers. And the Confederates say, essentially, we're not going to respect African-American soldiers as legitimate soldiers. If we capture them, African-American soldiers, we're going to execute them or re-enslave them. And Lincoln after that, and Congress after that says, well, okay, if that's your policy, then we're ending the POW exchange.
Oh, really?
We're not going to exchange POWs if that's how you're going to treat our Black soldiers.
Right.
And so the POW exchange breaks down. This leads to the creation of POW camps in the North and the South. And they are just not prepared for the huge numbers of POWs that end up in these camps. You know, thousands end up and so I think Andersonville at its height had 30,000 prisoners of war. It's a small
city. Really?
They don't have sewage, you know, so they're getting water from the same sources they relieve themselves in. So diarrhea becomes rampant. And Henry Wers was infamous for essentially not caring. You know, he apparently said things and did things that indicated he didn't care at all for the health of Union POWs. He was happy to have them die in droves. And after the war, he becomes a focus for, you know, the Union's rage. And he's hung. He's the only Confederate that's hung.
Oh, really?
And Union veterans, like I said, are furious. They want Confederate leaders like Jefferson Davis, like Robert E. Lee, to be tried and to be punished, even to be executed.
Oh.
And they're not. You know, Jefferson Davis is pardoned by President Andrew Johnson. Robert E. Lee's pardoned by President Andrew Johnson. They're virtually all pardoned. And so Union veterans, in some sense, are mad about that. They're sort of saying,
yeah,
you know,
sure.
We sacrificed all this blood and treasure, and no one gets punished. They're all let off.
Yeah, I got you.
And many others were upset about the failure of Reconstruction. You know, Reconstruction was this attempt to not only rebuild the country, but also to create a true biracial democracy for the first time in America's history. And it increasingly fails. And many Union veterans are upset at the racial violence that's perpetrated by white Southerners on African Americans in the South. They're sort of saying, what is going on? You know, what did we fight for here? I thought we ended slavery. I thought we freed African Americans, and they're being shot down in droves in places like Memphis and New Orleans and Colfax.
Is there, I guess maybe my last question becomes, is there one national newspaper? Is there like a USA Today of the time for people to hear all these stories that circulates? You know what I mean? How do they get what's going on in different parts?
So they lived in a time before kind of the professionalization of newspapers. Newspapers now are a bit more, some newspapers now will have a liberal or sort of a conservative slant or bias,
Sure.
but they're essentially objective and unbiased. They
Sure.
report the facts. That doesn't exist in the 19th century. Newspapers are openly and unapologetically affiliated with party. So you'll have a Republican Party newspaper, a Democratic Party newspaper.
Sure.
And so what information you get depends on what newspaper you read. For instance, a newspaper affiliated with the Republican Party you would get information about some of the racial massacres in the South, and you would get information about the depredations that white Southerners were committing on African Americans, and they would say, what is going on? What did we fight for? What was this all for?
Right.
If you're reading a Democratic newspaper, which at the time the Democratic Party was the party of white Southerners and the party of white supremacy, you would get those. They would say, hey, there was a racial massacre in Memphis or New Orleans, but they might say, oh, but the African Americans brought it on themselves. It was their fault.
Yeah, right.
And so you'd get that bias, that slant. So it really depended on what newspaper you read. There was no, I think maybe the Horace Greeley's Tribune paper was probably the closest to a national newspaper.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
But most people read their local newspaper.
Okay.
They read,
I got you.
And there was usually a Republican and a Democratic newspaper.
I got you.
In most towns, and they read their local newspaper.
Is there a question or some topic? How do people find out more about you? That kind of thing as we come to a close.
Oh, okay, yeah. Let's see. That's a good question. So you can read some of the stuff I've written. I've written for some op-eds for the Washington Post. You can, I guess, find me on Twitter at Dylan J. Carroll. And I have a website, dylanjcarroll.com, where you can read more about me and what I've written and my upcoming book project, which again is called Invisible Wounds, Mental Illness, and Civil War Soldiers.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, hey, I thank you so very much. I mean, we can go on forever,
I know.
So on and so forth. And I got more questions I'm sure I can come up with and more things you can address to, but I think we've, got a good understanding of, when you talk about history, really it's nothing more but today back then with different circumstances. That's history. They're still the same people. It's just different circumstances.
Well, I think, history is officially, we describe it as the study of change over time,
okay.
How and why things change. And so we look at, the context of the time. We try and understand, what people believed, why they believed it, what motivated them, what was the significance of events, trying to get into people's shoes and in their heads in the context of their time. But, history, and I think this is what you're speaking to, one of the values of studying history is history can be a guide. It can kind of help you predict and understand why things are the way they are. And I think I love a quote allegedly from Mark Twain. There's a whole bunch of alleged Mark Twain quotes, but allegedly Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I love that quote.
Okay, I got you. I love it. Yeah.
And history can, again, kind of be a guide. You can kind of see the undulations of history and kind of help you predict for, future events. And
I got you.
I was just thinking about this the other day because during the election last year, people were looking at Joe Biden's primary campaign, and they were saying, this is really awfully familiar to Harding's 1920 presidential campaign, which was the famous quote, return to normalcy.
Yeah.
And that's what Biden was campaigning on, saying we need to go back to normal.
Right.
And a lot of people were saying, if history repeats itself, because Harding won in 1920, this campaign could repeat itself. And that's kind of what happened. And
yes, I got you.
that history can kind of serve as a guide where you
I
can
got you.
recognize signposts from the past and say,
Yes.
okay, maybe something could happen here.
Everybody, I told you, I find some brilliant people, man, and they tell you, they give it to you straight, no chaser. I let them do the talking. I come up with these questions, and this gentleman knocked it out the box. He knocked it out the box. He found his calling. Somehow something clicked on, and you know, really what happened, his mother was telling him all these history things, and I know it just kept going on him and going on him. He said,
Yeah.
okay, since she's been talking about it, there it is. Whoop, there it is.
Yeah.
I thank you so very much for coming on the channel. Everybody, this is what we do. Keep following me. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Watch my movie, read my book. Is good. I'm telling you, not just because I wrote it. I had a guy tell me that, and it was a bunch of them, strangers. They've sent me messages. And to you, I say this with all sincerity. I mean all sincerity. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing. You're educating them people up in Sacramento, which is a beautiful town. And continue to do it. And we're looking forward to the book. And come on out with it. Had them book signings and all that other stuff. And let's rock and roll. We're gonna stay in touch. Everybody, with that, I'll say bye-bye. We out. Peace.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.